Well, this should surprise no one, unfortunately, but National Union of Journalists highlights the growing number of far-right attacks on journalists. And remember, these are the people who are meant to be in, quote, favour of freedom of speech, but is very often comes across and basically translated into campaigns of abuse, targeted harassment, and, outright general physical assault. Recently, in the case of Owen Jones. So, journalists and camera crews are coming under constant attack on an increasing basis from far-right activists, and police need to take a strategic approach to dealing with the growing problem, according to the head of the National Union of Journalists. Under the General Secretary, Michael Stainstreet, he called on law enforcement agencies to do more to tackle what he described as coordinated surge in violent extremism against journalists and media workers. As British politics has become more polarised since the EU referendum, the NUJ officers met with the Met Police in March, calling for officers to intervene more proactively when journalists are harassed or attacked at demonstrations and other public events. The union believes that there has been little improvement. Over the weekend, the Guardian columnist Owen Jones was attacked by a group of men outside a pub at 2 a.m. in central London, where he was out celebrating his birthday. He believes he was targeted for his high-profile left-wing views. There have been a string of other incidents in recent months. James Goddard, a notorious self-styled yellow vest activist, was convicted in June for a common assault of a photographer, Joel Goodman, in Manchester in February. At one point, Goddard told the photographer, "When there's no police around here, I'm going to take your head off your shoulders." Goodman, a photojournalist, told The Guardian that he had become a target for far-right demonstrators after it was wrongly suggested he worked for the anti-fascist group Hope Not Hate. Threats routinely arrive by phone, email, and text, he said. Photographers have been bearing the brunt of this for some time. Thank you for noticing us, but it has undoubtedly got worse, and although I'm loath to say it, Brexit has emboldened a lot of hostile attitudes. Goddard first came to public attention after he was filmed abusing the anti-Brexit MP Anna Soubry, calling her a Nazi and a traitor, and chasing her down the street just a few yards from Parliament. After pleading guilty to harassing her in July, Goddard was filmed emerging from court, promising that journalists who had written hit pieces about him would get protested against, and that the reporters were, quote, traitors to this country. Journalists covering the Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, complained of intimidation from his followers during his contempt of court trial earlier this summer. At one point during the hearings, a BBC camera crew outside the Old Bailey in central London were attacked and forced to leave by his supporters, who branded them BBC pedo scum and fake news wankers. Dominic Calistine, the BBC Home Affairs correspondent, wrote last month, "At every hearing of this saga, journalists have been abused. People have been spat at, cameras attacked, and cameramen were punched. Today, it was a beer can thrown. Lies have been told about us, our reports and events in court." It is understood that the broadcasters, including the BBC, Channel 4 and ITV, were forced to hire private security firms to protect their journalists during Robinson's court appearance last month. In June, the BBC, ITV and Sky wrote to the City of London Police and Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services, highlighting the intimidation journalists had faced over covering the legal proceedings in May outside the Old Bailey. That case has prompted wider concerns about safety and security in courts during such trials. The letter said, while some of it was at a level journalists might expect at a demonstration in support of a controversial figure, a significant amount of abuse went well beyond that. it became impossible to do any live correspondence out reporting on the hearing because our reporters were deliberately drowned out by Mr. Robinson's supporters wherever they tried to go live on air. Rebecca Chamber, chair of the Crime Reporters Association, said that the organisation had made recommendations to Her Majesty's courts and tribunal system following a number of alarming incidents in courts and hearings where journalists have been subject to can't say anything today. Have been subject to intimidation and threats from both inside and outside the courtroom. Online abuse directed at some journalists has become common in far-right circles, with Jones one of several targets, although some is visible on Facebook and Twitter. Efforts to police standards appear to have simply driven the most vicious discussions elsewhere. The quote, Tommy Robinson News, the encrypted Telegram Messenger account, which has more than 50,000 subscribers, is one place where vitriolic criticisms are aired frequently. Posts routinely accuse Jones of treachery and threaten violence. Vitriol is also directed against female journalists who have covered the far-right leaders' activities. The account, which is regularly posted self-short videos of Robinson addressing his supporters before he was jailed for contempt of court last month, is understood to have been run by the far-right activist and his inner circle. James Parkinson, a freelance cameraman who routinely covers far-right demonstrations and events, says that while there has always been the anti-media aggression amongst the far-right, the number of those prepared to act has grown. There has been a change in mood. The number of people prepared to be angry or aggressive has increased. It started when Donald Trump began talking about fake news and has worsened as Brexit has gone on, he said. Law enforcement agencies have gradually become more concerned about the activities of the far right, with the security service MI5 taking the lead in combating extreme right-wing terrorism from October last year. Five terror plots by far-right figures have been disrupted since the spring of 2017, Whitehall sources have said. So, yeah, so much for the free speech warriors. They care so much about freedom of speech that they'll go out of their way to attack people who are, well, doing their job, promoting freedom of speech. And like I say, you have to support journalists when it comes to freedom of speech, purely for the fact that if they are threatened and stopped from doing their jobs, freedom of speech can't continue. And the right, as much as it loves to say how it's in support and favour of free speech, these actions do not show that they are in favour of this speech and that they're only in support of people who are on their side, which is not surprising because they've shown that time and time again.